end or start from the beginning. Alright, what we're going to move into this week, all of our assignments are going to start focusing on equations that have two variables in them. So you can see the name of this assignment is Solutions to Two Variable Equations. We're going to start looking at equations that have an x and a y in them. Specifically, there's two goals with today's assignment. The first one is how do we test whether an ordered pair is just a kind of fancy way to talk about this xy number in parentheses. So how do we test if an ordered pair is a solution to an equation? And then later on, towards the end of the assignment, we're also going to talk about how do we find the Y-intercept and the X-intercept. Marco, awesome to have you joining us, buddy. So specifically, as we talk all week long and next week about working with these equations that have two variables, we're going to talk about solutions. And now that our equations have two variables, an x and a y, a solution for us is really going to mean the pair of values that would make the equation true when you plug them into the equation or when you substitute in. So for our very first problem today, they say consider the following equation. And the equation, which is also written on my whiteboard here, says 2x minus 3y equals 10. And they want to know if 2x minus 3y equals 10, the first part says is 8 and negative 2, so they give us an ordered pair, an x comma y number written in parentheses, and they say is 8 negative 2 a solution to this equation. So I'm going to make my whiteboard a little bit larger, but if 8 negative 2, we're going to test whether or not that's a solution. The key here is to plug the 8 and the negative 2 in for x and y. So if we have an ordered pair and they're listing 8 and negative 2, like you see on my whiteboard here for part A, they're really saying can 8 take the value of 8 and y take the value of negative 2 in this equation. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to replace the x with 8. That's going to become 2 times 8. And I'm going to replace the y with negative 2. So it used to say negative 3 times y. Now it says negative 3 times negative 2. And that's still going to need to equal 10. So if 8 and negative 2 really is a solution here, when we do out the math on the left side of this equation, we should be getting 10 equals 10. It should work in this equation. 2 times 8 gives us positive 16. And negative 3 times negative 2, a negative multiplied with a negative creates a positive. So that gives us a positive 6, which is a big thing to see here. And if that's the solution, 16 plus 6 needs to equal 10. Michaela, awesome to have you joining us. Thanks for coming in. And anybody else who's been joining us, feel free to say hi in the chat. So 16 plus 6 gives us 22. So now we're at 22 equals 10. You and I have always known that 22 does not equal 10. The equation's now saying something that's nonsense. So what does that mean? What does that tell us? It means that this possible solution, this ordered pair 8 and negative 2, is not a solution to this equation. It doesn't work when I plug 8 in for x and negative 2 in for y. So that's how for the very first one I'm arriving at an answer. This is not a solution. And then if you're working along at home, hopefully you have a paper and pencil with you or some kind of whiteboard like I do, and that would allow you to also put an image of your work in. I'm not going to go ahead and take an image of this whiteboard that you see here, but I would love to see images like that when I go back and kind of mark through this at some point the next couple days. If you have any questions, if some of this doesn't make sense, feel free to slow us down. And if it makes sense or if you have the right answer, feel free to chat along with us for those of you who are live. If you're at home, I would encourage you anytime we're working on stuff, pause the video, try to do some of this on your own. Marco, thanks for saying hi 9 times. Alright, so we're going to move into part B now. Part B has us working with the same equation still as 2x minus 3y equals 10. But now part B says to us, if x equals 11, then what value would y need to take for a solution? So that's what I've kind of noted on the whiteboard here, which I'm going to make larger again. So they said if x equals 11, what value does y need to take? So I have my equation 2x minus 3y needs to equal 10. And part B says if you make x be 11, this ordered pair here, what does y need to be? That focus is a little off. We'll give it a second. So we're going to plug the 11 in for x. That's going to become 2 multiplied with 11 minus 3y needs to be equal to 10. They told me x needs to be 11. What value does y take? So I'm going to go ahead and plug 11 in for x. 2 times 11 instead of 2 times x now gives me 22. So the equation becomes 22 minus 3y needs to equal 10. This was a little more challenging than I'd meant to make for the first problem, but now this should kind of look like those one variable equations we solved. I need to cancel out the 22 on the left side, and subtracting 22 can do that. So I get negative 3y needs to be equal to negative 12. Again, I'm trying to get the y all by itself. I first cancel out the 22. Now, I'm going to go ahead. I've got negative 3 multiplied with y. If I don't know what number times negative 3 gives me negative 12, I can divide both sides by negative 3, which cancels out the coefficient, or the multiplied by negative 3. And this tells me negative 12 divided by negative 3 and negative divided by a negative is a positive. 12 divided by 3 gives us 4. So that tells me if I had made x 11, if x were 11, then y needs to be 4. So again, anytime they tell you for a two-variable equation, they tell you what one variable is, plug that variable into the equation, and then solve the equation for the other given variable. In this case, if x is 11, then y needs to be 4. The whiteboard's too big there, then you can't see actually what I put the answer in. Give me 1 second so you can see that too. So again, if x is 11, then y is going to need to be 4, is what we plugged in there. As always, if you're doing this work at home on a piece of paper, whiteboard, please insert images of your work so we know you're doing this on your own as well while you're working with me. Alright, we're going to move into number 2 now. And now number 2, number 3, number 4, they all build directly on what we just kind of talked about. You're going to get equations that have two variables in them, usually an x and a y. And if they're asking you which ones are solutions to these equations, you need to plug those solutions into test. So right now, for number 2, the equation we're working with says y equals 4x minus 1. And they give us two possible answers. Part A says, can x be 2 and 1? 2 for x, 1 for y. Part B says, can x be 4 and can y be 9? So they give us two possible solutions for A and B, and I've noted those on my whiteboard here, 2 and 1 and 4 and 9. So to test whether or not those work in this equation, I'm going to go ahead and plug those numbers in. If you're with us live, feel free to be going ahead figuring out which answers work. If you're at home, feel free, please pause the video and try to work this out on your own. I'm going to plug in a 2 for x and a 1 for y. So I'm going to replace my y with 1. So the equation becomes 1 equals 4 times 2 instead of 4 times x, because I'm replacing 2 for x, minus 1. And I made one mistake here. I copied the equation wrong. I'm seeing that now, so it should say 4x minus 7. I'm sorry for that, and hopefully you were seeing the same thing as you're following along at home. It should say 4x minus 7. So now I'm seeing 4 times 2 minus 7, and my apologies for that mistake. Make sure you copy that equation correctly. Kevin, good to have you with us, man. So, now that I've plugged 2 and 1 into the equation, I'm going to run through, see if it works. 4 times 2 gives us 8. So the right side of this equation becomes 8 minus 7. And 8 minus 7 combines or simplifies to give us 1. So when I plugged in a 2 for x and a 1 for y, the equation simplified or boiled down to say 1 equals 1, something that's a true statement. So based on that, I know that 2 and 1 is a possible solution to this equation. But I also need to consider, could 4 and 9 work in this equation? So I'm going to go back to this equation now, and I'm going to replace the y with 9, and I'm going to replace the x with 4 to test the other possible answer. So it becomes 9 equals 4 times 4 minus 7. So again, what we did there, took the y, replaced it with 9, took the x, replaced it with 4 because that's the second possible answer from part B here. 4 times 4, we're going to now do the math. That gives us 16. So the right side of the equation becomes 16 minus 7. And when we combine 16 with a negative 7, or when we do 16 minus 7, the difference is 9. So for this equation, when we plugged in 4 and 9 as a solution, I'm going to write that in green because 4 and 9 also worked. When I did plug in 4 and 9, the equation simplified down to a true statement. So based on that, I'm going to pick C. So again, anytime they're asking which ones of these ordered pairs, these XY numbers that are stuck in or sitting in parentheses are solutions, you need to plug in the X and the Y number into the equation and see if it works. If you're at home with us, I'm going to leave you to do number 3 on your own, actually. I'm going to leave you to plug in these answers for number 3 to try to see, because number 3 is a lot like number 2. So hopefully, if that makes sense for number 2, you could do number 3 on your own. I'm going to keep us moving. We're going to go on to problem number 4 now. If you're at home and you can't figure out number 3 on your own, please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to jump in and help you out. But hopefully, if 2 makes sense, for number 3, you're able to plug those ordered pairs in and see which ones possibly work. Okay, problem number 4, which I'm highlighting now, tells you to complete the missing value in the solution to the equation. And the equation that we're given, which I'll copy on my whiteboard, says 4x plus y needs to be equal to 10. And the ordered pair that they give us, which I'm going to kind of write here, the ordered pair that they ask us to complete has a blank number where the x would normally be, and a negative 6 where the y should be. So here, the ordered pair they want us to complete says we don't know what x is yet, but y needs to be negative 6. So based on that, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the negative 6 for y. They want me to figure out for this problem what value could x take if y is negative 6 in this equation. So I replaced the y with negative 6, and the equation now says 4x plus a negative 6 has to equal 10. Now I'm going to take that equation. I want to start solving for x. If I think about drawing the river through the equal sign and splitting the equation in half, I see the x is on the left side of the equation. I want to get x all by itself. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of the negative 6, and I'm going to add 6 to do that. And Christella, it's great to see you joining us. Thanks for coming in. We are about halfway in. You can either rewind the video, or I think this will make sense and you can stay with us live. So if I add 6 to cancel out the negative 6 on the left side, I also have to add 6 to the right side of the equation. And now it says 4x needs to be equal to 16. I could divide both sides of the equation by 4. But I know 4 times 4 is what makes 16, so I'm going to solve by inspection. I'm going to go ahead and say x equals 4. But really the way I got there is if I divide both sides of that equation by 4, that's another way to solve it. So I can get x equals 4 that way, or a lot of you might already know x equals 4 without taking that last step there. So that helps me tell here that if y is negative 6, well then x needs to be 4. So again, to recap, and this is really the second Khan Academy assignment this week, they're going to give you half of a solution to these two variable equations. You need to plug in that half and then solve for the missing piece. We're moving on to number 5 now. If anything ever is a little unclear, you have questions, feel free to talk in the live chat to pause us. If things make sense, if you get the right answers, that helps to chat along with us too. Alright, here's number 5. Number 5 is very similar. It's also what you're going to see in that second Khan Academy assignment this week. It's going to say complete the missing value in the solution to the equation. Here the equation's a little more complicated. I'll write it on my whiteboard. They say y plus 2 needs to be equal to negative 3 times x minus 4. So the equation's a little more complicated, but it still has a y and an x, and it's just relating them to each other. And here they've told me, I'm going to change my ordered pair on my whiteboard this time. They tell us here that we don't know what x is yet, but we know y needs to be negative 2. So I'm going to go into this equation, and I'm going to replace the y with negative 2. The left side of the equation now says negative 2 plus 2. The right side still says negative 3 times x minus 4. Negative 2 plus 2, I'm going to just simplify the left side first here. Gives me 0. So 0 needs to be equal to negative 3 times x minus 4. Now there are two ways to really, I think lots of ways, but two good ways to solve this equation at this point. One of them is to understand the 0 property. Negative 3, the only thing it could multiply by to equal 0, negative 3 needs to multiply with 0 here, because that's the only way it could ever equal 0. So what number could I plug in for x here? What could I turn x into to make those parentheses be equivalent to 0? I could change the x into a positive 4. 4 minus 4 would make 0, and 0 times negative 3 would give me the 0 I need. If that doesn't make sense, another way to have solved this, and Zamil, great to have you with us, I could have distributed the negative 3. I just solved this by inspection, by understanding a property of math. I knew this number times negative 3 had to make 0, so I knew x minus 4 had to be 0, which told me if x is 4 would be good to go. If that doesn't make sense to you, you could distribute the negative 3, multiply that out, and get negative 3x, and the negative 3 also multiplies with the negative 4 to get a positive 12. So a second method to solve here could have been to distribute. This is going to be more work, but is more straightforward. I could subtract 12 now from both sides. That gets negative 3x equals negative 12. And then we could divide by negative 3, and negative 12 divided by negative 3 would give us that same positive 4 that we already talked about earlier. Alright, if you have any questions, let me know. As always with 4 and 5, and this is linked directly to your second Khan Academy, if they tell you half of the solution, plug that half in and then solve for the missing piece. Alright, number 6 is to prepare you for, let me make the whiteboard a little bit smaller. Number 6 is to get you ready for the third and the fourth assignments on Khan Academy this week. The third and the fourth assignments start talking about intercepts. Specifically, they start talking about the Y-Intercept and the X-Intercept. And before I get going on number 6, I'm going to just quickly go back to the key terms. And Christella, thank you for the feedback. And when they ask us about Y-Intercepts and X-Intercepts, we need to understand what they really mean. Oh, the whiteboard's in the way, give me a second. There we go. A Y-intercept really describes to us the value for y when x is equal to 0. So Y-intercept and X-intercept both talk about possible solutions to our linear equations. They're specific solutions. The Y-intercept is going to be the solution for y when x is equal to 0, or what value does y take when x is 0. And the converse, or the opposite, the X-intercept, says what value will x take if I set y equal to 0. So based on that, as we come back to problem 6, problem 6 gives us the equation 9x minus 7y equals 14. and they ask us to find the intercepts for that. This is also going to happen exactly on your 4th Khan Academy assignment. I actually pulled this equation from assignment 4 this week. So it says 9x minus 7y equals 14, and we're first going to talk about the y-intercept. And the big thing to understand about a y-intercept is y-intercept says, what value does y take when x is equal to 0? So here, I'm going to be replacing, to find a y-intercept, I need to change the x into 0, or substitute the x out and replace it with 0. So I've replaced the x value with 0 in my equation, and the nice thing about finding x-intercepts and y-intercepts is they eliminate an entire term. If I multiply 9 by 0, anything multiplied by 0 is gone. It makes nothing. And as we're going to talk in future weeks, part of the reason they make graphs based on x and y-intercepts is it's really easy to find the y-intercept or x-intercept by turning x into 0 or y into 0. Now I have negative 7y equals 14. I just need to cancel out the multiply by negative 7, so I'm going to divide both sides of my equation by negative 7. And that gives me y equals negative 2. So that helps me realize that the y-intercept here, if x is 0, in other words, the y value needs to be negative 2. Because negative 7 times negative 2 would give you a positive 14, which would be equal to 14. And so if 9x is 0, then y needs that negative 2. The opposite, if they ask you to find an x-intercept, they're saying, hey, what value is the x variable going to take? We don't know what the x is yet, but they say for an x-intercept, what value should x have if we make the y value 0? Or if x is doing all the work, what value does x have to do to make the equation true? So back to my original equation, 9x minus 7y equals 14. And now to find an x-intercept, we want to know what x value needs to be put into this equation if y is set equal to 0. So I'm going to replace my y with 0, so the equation becomes 9x minus 7 times 0 on the left side. And again, anytime we're finding intercepts, they're going to eliminate the entire term, because 0 times anything makes 0. So this equation becomes 9x on the left side is equal to 14 on the right side. I'm going to need to divide by 9. That's the opposite of multiplying by 9. And what we'll find here, 9 divided by 9 cancels out, we get just x. But on the right side of our equation, 14 divided by 9, that's not going to divide evenly. It won't make an integer. It's going to make a decimal. It is totally okay to leave my answer as a fraction, so long as I simplify that fraction. And it turns out for today's example, 14 over 9, the fraction 14 over 9, cannot be simplified any further. If I want to insert a fraction, it's okay to just write this as 14/9. That's what I did at first there. If you ever want to get fancy in Google Documents, there's a way to write the fractions. If you're inserting an equation, so first you need to insert an equation. That's either hit new equation or hit insert and then equation. And then up here, this A over B button is the fraction button. And now I can put 14, and then I use the right arrow on my keyboard. I hit the right arrow on my keyboard to move to the bottom of the fraction. And I put a 9 on the bottom. If I hit the right arrow on my keyboard again, that pops me and keeps moving me through, and the left arrow can move me backwards and allow me to edit that fraction and change it if I want. So that gets us to the end of this assignment here. That puts us to the final question there. Hopefully this is helpful for the first 4 Khan Academy assignments this week, numbers 1 through 4. That's what I kind of designed the lesson for. I'm going to make one last plug while you're here with me. If you are working on Khan Academy or IXL on your own, please, 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 I've made a bunch of videos that try to help you out on these assignments. So if you are working on Khan Academy or IXL on your own, if you go into Google Classroom, at the very top of Google Classroom, you can open up the weekly schedule and syllabus. That's a document I keep posting. So that sits at the very top of your classwork tab on Google Classroom. And if you open up that weekly schedule and syllabus, it's where that little calendar icon is. Within that document, it's going to list all of your Khan Academy and IXL assignments for the week. Of course, I'm too lagged up using open broadcasting. And then each one of those Khan Academy assignments has a blue link, and if you follow that blue link, that will take you to a YouTube video where it's me working through a few examples there. So please don't be shy about going to this weekly schedule to access those YouTube videos to get extra help if you find yourself stuck on any Khan Academy assignments on your own. IXL doesn't have videos yet. I'm hoping to add videos for that later today and tomorrow. So anytime you're in the weekly schedule, anything with a blue link has video support to help you out. Thanks to those of you who joined us. Tomorrow we'll be coming together to play Kahoot, and the work will be related to what we did today here.